Okay, in this video tutorial I'm going to talk quickly about cancer and the key ideas you need to know in terms of that for your exams. So firstly, one thing that pops up again and again, that seems to pop up a lot in exam papers, is this idea here. So the reason they've probably put cancer in the nuclear division topic is that cancer really results from, one of the key ideas in there is that it results from the uncontrolled division of normal cells. And the mistake that's easy to make here is to say that it's simply the rapid growth of cells. But different cells in our body grow at different rates naturally. So for instance, our bones grow much more slowly than, say, our epithelial cells that line our guts. Our blood cells have a much faster turnover, so divide at a much faster rate. Now, generally speaking, you may see some textbooks or at university, it may be said that cancer results from rapid or increased rate of division. And there's some truth to that, I guess, too, in terms of the fact that normally if a population of cells grows more slowly than the surrounding cells, it's unlikely to develop into a tumor. But the key thing is here, in your exams, to look for the definition, if it's a multi-choice, or to use that term uncontrolled division, or uncontrolled mitosis of normal cells. And that results in a tumor. Now, cancer has a few extra bits attached to it, so we'll look at that. But be aware on the lookout. That's one really key idea that just comes up again and again and again. So you're looking for that word, that term uncontrolled. So basically, looking at that, regulation of cell growth. Cell division is essential for growth and repair. Cells in our body are constantly dying and are replaced by identical cells. And the rate at which this occurs depends on the tissue. So our blood, skin, so epithelial cells, gut, again, epithelial cells lining that, have a relatively high turnover. So therefore cell division has to be a highly regulated process, because the rate of cell division in various tissues is very different depending on the wear and tear on that tissue and lifespan, I guess. So I believe these are some cancer cells under a microscope. Just a nice little picture there. So uncontrolled mitosis. If we lose the control over mitosis, cells can divide repeatedly, and a tumor forms. So a tumor is simply an irregular mass of cells. So they often have an irregular shape or appearance. And so, for instance, you may have heard of stem cells. Stem cells are basically cells that haven't differentiated. They haven't decided on their career yet, what type of cell they're going to be. And there are different levels of that. Some have, started to decide they'll be in the blood industry, but whether they'll be a white or a red blood cell or what type of blood cell, they're not sure. So essentially, it's just like you students who, maybe some of you have decided you're going to go into arts or science, or there are different degrees of stem cells. Some are, like babies, that could still, everything's open, and some of them are a bit further down the line. And one idea is that we could use stem cells to treat disorders. For instance, damage to heart muscle doesn't repair itself very easily, or if you sever the spinal cord. There's some evidence if you inject or insert stem cells into that site, they may differentiate and become the required cell type. But the concern is that, for instance, it's been shown if you take stem cells and place them in cardiac tissue and muscle tissue, they turn into cardiac cells. They'll differentiate or develop into cardiac cells. But they don't line up like all the other muscle cells and contract in the right direction, which makes them pretty useless, to be honest. So there's a lot of cell signaling involved in ensuring that cells grow in the correct orientation, and essentially so that they work as part of a team, so that their growth is coordinated based on the cells around them. So when we get uncontrolled growth, often you get an irregular mass where the shapes and the appearance of the cells is quite different from the surrounding cells. So if you get uncontrolled growth in muscle, you'll get a tumor, but the muscle cells might not be nice and long and thin and striated like the regular muscle cells around them, and therefore they may not function properly either. So again, this idea, uncontrolled mitosis, can result in the formation of a tumor. So the genetics of that. So most cancers occur as a result of a series of genetic mutations. And a mutation is any permanent change to the sequence of DNA within a gene. So changing the sequence of a gene. So not changing the sequence to any gene doesn't necessarily result in cancer. So let's think about what type of genes do you think would if we change them, could promote cancer? Well, there's really two classes. So there's some genes that promote growth, essentially, that promote growth or promote mitosis, and there can be a mutation in those, essentially, that increases their activity so that they are more active and therefore promote growth even more. Or often it's actually a mutation in the sequences just before the gene that regulate their expression, so that gene becomes overexpressed. The other option is there can be genes that normally inhibit growth or reduce the growth rate or the frequency of mitosis. And those genes that can be mutated, they can be lost. So for instance, the cells in our body have a very important pathway that's activated, that's called apoptosis. And apoptosis means programmed cell death. So it's basically suicide. But it's very important that our cells have the ability to essentially program their own cell death, so to kill themselves or to shut themselves down. And that helps to ensure that if you get cells that are in the wrong place or aren't needed or are growing too quickly, the body has a mechanism to kind of turn those off or shut them down. And in cancer cells, you find that often genes involved in that pathway have been mutated and no longer function. So anyway, a mutated gene that causes cancer is called an oncogene. And you may recognize the onco bit here from oncology. The oncology ward in a hospital is the ward where they treat cancer patients. So an oncogene is a gene that causes cancer. And usually it's a modified version of a regular gene. So for instance, if you have a gene that normally regulates growth, and suddenly this mutation causes it to promote the growth even more, to promote mitosis and lose that control over mitosis, that gene has become an oncogene. And so genes that regulate growth or regulate mitosis are often referred to as proto-oncogenes, genes that can potentially become oncogenes. So an oncogene is simply a gene that is usually a mutated version of a normal gene that causes cancer. These mutations actually occur quite frequently, so it's quite common that these mutations occur. However, most mutated cells are either crippled due to a loss of function or are destroyed by the body's immune system. Our body has an incredible ability to actually recognize cells that aren't functioning properly or aren't in the right place and essentially destroy them. And so a lot of tumors are actually picked up and destroyed by our immune system. And that's one of the scientific theories behind why sometimes people quite miraculously go into remission. It could be that the immune system wasn't effectively recognizing this tumor, and for whatever reason, at some point the immune system starts to recognize, hey, this is actually something foreign, and starts to slowly, essentially, destroy the tumor itself. And so most of us would actually have had cancer cells in our body, but the immune system actually clears them out. So the other reason why these mutations don't cause cancer quite as often as we would expect, I guess, is we also have mechanisms for repairing our DNA, repair mechanisms. So even though the rates of mutation are quite high, we have fairly decent mechanisms for repairing DNA damage too. So the difficulty with the immune response there, and the reason why all tumours aren't eliminated, is that these cells do still look incredibly similar to, the rest of your cells or the neighbouring cells, and that's because genetically they're actually very similar. There may only be a few genes that have, a slightly different sequence, and so they may look very, very similar, at least to the immune system. They may have similar proteins in their surface. So these mutations can cause cancer only. The mutations that cause cancer usually only occur in a single cell, but then that cell obviously passes the mutated gene onto its descendants or its daughter cells, and if it's growing faster than the neighbouring cells, you suddenly can end up with a large number of cells carrying that mutation. It's also worth noting that most forms of cancer, or I'd say basically almost every form of cancer, usually involves mutation of several genes. The mutation in a single gene isn't normally enough, and that's because there's complex regulation. There's multiple pathways that regulate growth and mitosis. So you need to lose the function usually in several genes control mitosis before you really get that uncontrolled mitosis that causes the development of a tumour. And in that note, most cancer cells, usually one of the first genes to be affected is a DNA repair gene, and so that increases the likelihood of further mutations, and then it's kind of downhill from there. So Kaposi sarcoma is a good example of the immune system's role. This is a common tumour that forms in HIV patients. So people suffering from HIV may develop these spots. These are actually small tumours in the skin. That's because the HIV virus actually reduces the immune system. So these are normally, our immune system normally keeps these in check and would prevent these from developing. So it recognises those cells as abnormal. A typical tumour contains about 1 billion cells by the time it's detected. And so that's one reason for instance, for women, breast cancer is a common form of cancer. It's a good idea to get checked regularly, because often by the time a tumor is detected, you're looking at a billion cells that already carry those mutated genes. So how cancer spreads. So this is, I guess, the key difference between what we call a tumour and a cancer. So a tumour is any irregular mass of cells that often the cells are irregular and don't function quite the way they should. A cancer is effectively a tumour that can spread. So we use the term metastasis. Or we can refer to the tumours, the secondary tumours, the ones that have spread, as metastases. So metastasis or metastases is a term used for spreading, and that's what differentiates between what we call a benign tumour, or simply often referred to as a tumour, or a cancerous tumour or cancer. So what causes mutations? Well, essentially, most cancers or tumours are caused either through inherited faulty genes, but often also a combination or a contributing factor are what we call mutagens. So mutagens are essentially any factor that causes mutations. So examples of mutagens are UV light or other forms of ionizing radiation, certain chemicals, even alcohol, high-fat diet has been shown to have a slightly mutagenic effect. So obviously some things are much stronger mutagens than others, but it's often the chemicals and radiation in our environment. Some of those things do have slightly mutagenic effects. So a factor that causes cancer is called a carcinogen. So that's a factor that causes cancer. So it's worth noting here that all carcinogens, all the factors that cause cancer, are a type of mutagen. but not all mutagens are carcinogens. And the reason for that is some of these mutagens affect genes that don't regulate growth, and some of these mutagens affect genes that do regulate growth or regulate mitosis, and the ones that do regulate mitosis are likely to cause cancer. So it's the mutagens that regulate mitosis or cellular growth that are carcinogens that cause cancer. So if you look here, causes of cancer, interesting kind of statistics here. Radiation, only 1%. Diet, 35%. So your diet has a big influence on whether you'll get cancer. Tobacco, 30%. People who smoke, much higher rates of cancer. Exposure to sunlight, how often you spend in the sun, so that's UV exposure, I guess. Other, viruses, 7%. Why would viruses affect the chance? Well, viruses insert their DNA into our DNA, and sometimes they may insert their DNA right where one of our genes are. And if they insert their DNA into a region where one of our genes lies, then obviously they can essentially mutate or have an effect on that gene. So that's how viruses can affect the expression of some of those genes too. So they can cause cancer as well. So the HPV vaccine is a vaccine against the HPV virus, one of the herpes viruses, and that virus has been shown that if women catch it, they're much more likely to develop cervical cancer further down the line. Occupational factors. And stress would even be part of probably one of the occupational factors there, and alcohol, a small percentage there too. There are hereditary factors, but hereditary factors, I guess you inherit a susceptibility. What that means is you may already have one gene that isn't functioning quite right, but that's not enough to develop into cancer itself, but it means that you've got a higher chance of, getting further mutations, I guess. So you kind of inherit a susceptibility or an increased likelihood of developing cancer. You don't actually inherit the cancer itself. So when you're talking about causes of cancer in an exam, it's best to steer clear of talking about inheriting it, because if you make it sound like you're saying you're inheriting cancer, you don't actually inherit cancer from, it's not a disease that's passed from mother to child or father to son. You can inherit a susceptibility to it, so you can inherit, an increased likelihood of developing cancer, but not the cancer itself. So here we go, just a little bit more on that idea of a benign tumor. So here we've got normal cells, and a benign tumor basically do not usually spread. They're usually slower growing. And the reason they can cause damage is basically simply because they can compress or apply pressure on surrounding tissues. So they could block the intestines or blood vessels. And normally the outcome for a lot of benign tumors is really good, because essentially you can cut out or remove the tumor, and that usually restores function. The pressure is relieved off the vessel, it's only when they're in a really tricky spot, in an area where essentially a surgeon isn't going to be able to remove it without damaging, some essential system. Like, if it's in the brain, it's a little bit more tricky, because, if you're cutting it out, you are going to potentially damage some of the surrounding brain tissue. And so it's going to depend where in the brain, and whether it's easy to get at, whether it's deep within the brain, would affect kind of the prognosis. The prognosis is kind of the expected outcome, whether it looks like it'll be treated successfully, or whether it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So a benign tumor, basically benign is a tumor that doesn't spread. And so it's normally slower growing. Sorry, growing got cut off there. So a cancer cell are ones that basically essentially can spread. So they can metastasize. And they can normally invade and destroy surrounding tissues. So it's sort of much more dangerous, because they can actually get in and kind of take over or damage surrounding tissues. And cells from the original tumor can break off and spread and essentially grow into secondary tumors. So they spread through the blood or the lymphatic system. So and that results in what we call secondary growths or secondary tumors. And so that really then is you can't really usually treat that. Some of the larger tumors might be removed surgically, but essentially if it's metastasized, if there's lots of small tumors all over the body, you're not going to be able to go around and kind of cuddle those out, especially since some of them, there may be more that are simply too small to detect. So at that point you need to use drugs and things like that to try and treat it, chemotherapy and things like that. So the outcome for that, or it's I guess much more dangerous, and this is essentially the difference between a tumor and a cancerous tumor or a cancer, is when it spreads. So again, that keyword metastases, or it can metastasize, or that process metastasis or metastasis, the spreading of those cancer cells. And one reason that these spread whereas these ones don't is, for instance, cancer cells, our normal cells have, again, a pathway, so a series of genes that regulate. So most cells have what we call contact dependency. So that means that they have certain receptors or proteins that anchor them to their neighboring cells. And if they're not anchored or attached to their neighboring cells, that activates that pathway that essentially shuts down the cell or causes programmed cell death, apoptosis. And so if they lose that contact or adhesion dependency, that means that they can grow freely or as an individual cell without being connected to their neighboring cells. And obviously that's going to be a big part of helping them to essentially spread and grow at other sites. Other genes that help a cancer spread are cells can secrete factors that promote the development of blood vessels into the tumor. And so if those genes are mutated, or so if they essentially promote the development of blood vessels into the tumor, that's going to help it grow much more quickly and spread too. So there we go, metastasis. I'm not sure that's about right. Nope, I think it got cut off, metastasis. So that's the spreading. So there we go, there it's right, metastasis. When cancer cells spread from the place at which they first arose as a primary growth or tumour to distant locations in the body. This results in many secondary growths or tumours. So if it's spreading, in this case we could call these cancers as well. So benign and malignant, another term for cancerous, tumours can have a high energy demand on the body due to their relatively rapid growth. Because they're usually dividing more quickly than the surrounding tissues, they require more energy. And so one sign of cancer can be rapid weight loss. So a benign tumour is one that doesn't spread, and a malignant or cancerous tumour is one that is capable of spreading of metastasis. So the metastasis depends on the cancer cell acquiring two separate abilities: increased motility and invasiveness. Cells that metastasize are basically the same kind of those in the original tumor. So this is where you hear like really crazy stories of, brain tissue developing in muscle, or you can see sometimes cells that seem to be the wrong type developing in another tissue. So you can see here the process. So the cells grow locally as a tumor. Some cells break away and enter the bloodstream or the lymph vessels, and they travel via the blood or the lymph, and eventually they get trapped in usually some smaller vessel, and escape the blood or lymph vessels into other tissues, and then they essentially grow and divide in that new location, growing into a secondary tumor. And at this stage, it's a little bit, you've got to treat it with things like chemo, because some of these might be so small you simply won't be able to detect them. Cool, so that's basically it for cancer. I think the key ideas there, remember that, uncontrolled mitosis results in a tumor. And then if those cells are able to spread or metastasize, that results in a malignant or cancerous tumor, are probably the really key ideas. So I hope that was helpful, and that's pretty much it for actually the nuclear division topic. So only two tutorials, but I guess they're a little slightly longer ones. And I'll try and get on with the next one.